Hi, everybody. I guess I'm not on the speaker. We have a relatively small group today. We're probably maybe worn out because there's a big tech conference going on literally right now, 20 minutes away. But welcome to the Advanced Angular Lunch, recently rebranded. Today we have Nathan here from Oasis Digital. He's going to introduce us to NativeScript, and then he's going to be subjected to hard questions about NativeScript for the remainder of the time. We will see how that goes. And I try to always get my plug in. Paul here in the audience runs a evening Angular meetup. And so if you have people you know who would like to go to an evening event, please, Paul will get you, connect with him. He'll get you connected to it to get people to that event also. So take it away.
Hi, everybody. Like Kyle said, my name is Nathan. I'm going to talk to you about NativeScript. I'm going to give you a little bit shorter version of a talk I gave a couple weeks ago at the DevFest. And there I kind of walked through my README for this project, where you can, it's found here, you can step through the project and convert the Tour of Heroes app that we've all probably seen 1,000 times. You can convert it to a native app, and not the whole thing, just pieces of it. But I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a rundown over that instead of stepping through it piece by piece. And I'm going to start talking to you a little bit about what NativeScript is. But before we get started, if we want to make this a little bit more interactive, anyone that's interested can download an app for their phone. It's the NativeScript Playground. And then when we get to that point, I'll kind of show you where you can use it. But you'll be able to use the app to scan the QR code. There's one here for the app that we're going to be working on. And then everyone can kind of see that, get a little bit of a demo of how this will work out and how you can use this to develop. So what is NativeScript? NativeScript is a tool to help web developers use their skills to build native apps or to build split applications or applications where you can code share some of your code from a web app and use that to convert to create a mobile app for iOS or Android. And so how that works is you generally will just have your web app that you've already built, and you can run the schematic ng add NativeScript schematics, which it's in here down in the beginning of the README here. But what that does is it goes through and makes it configures your file, your app to build into a NativeScript app, and it adds a couple extra files to components and modules, and helps you split your logic into a web app and a native app. And so when your project goes to build, it'll add a global style sheet for NativeScript, because NativeScript is going to have a separate subset of CSS that it uses, and it's going to have some separate template files. So when you run that schematic, it'll add the global styles and templates and CSS files for each component and your modules. And so when you go to build, when you run ngserve, Angular will just go through and build as normal, taking all the normal files that it's always been using, and build the web app as normal. But when you run tns run iOS, tns is Telerik NativeScript. It's a library you'll have to download to build out NativeScript apps. But when you run this, it has a separate Webpack build that gets configured when you run your schematic. And it goes through your project structure and looks for these files that are affixed with .tns. So you'll have this. So when you're looking at your component files after the fact, you'll see that you'll have a like some component .html, .tns, .html. And so when it's going through the build, it'll ignore the .html file and pull in the .tns.html file. And it uses this intelligent build system to kind of go through and shuffle through your files and say, you know, I'm going to ignore these ng files, and I'll pull in these NativeScript files, and I'll build out this app separately. And so NativeScript is really good at code sharing and code splitting. And by code sharing and code splitting, I mean grabbing the logic you want to reuse, and also allowing you to split out and have extra logic that is only on your NativeScript side or only on your web app side. So you can imagine completing a web project and business coming to you and saying, all right, great, good job. Now we need a web app, or now we need a native app as well. And if you'd like to reuse some of that code, NativeScript will let you do that. It's designed for Angular or Vue or even just vanilla JavaScript and TypeScript. But it's really set up for Angular, or it started out with Angular, and that's one of the easiest ways to go about implementing it. It allows you to have a completely different route structure if you want. You can have a NativeScript-only route structure. You can have a web-only route structure, or you can share your entire route system if you want. All your modules will have to be split. You'll have to have a corresponding TNS module for all the NativeScript pieces you want to bring over. Providers can be shared or split. So if you have for instance, if you want to have some camera functionality in your web app, and you want to use the native web API for a camera system or service, and you want to use the native mobile API for the native side, you can have a separate camera service that works just on one side and another one that works on the other side. And then, like I said, component logic, you can share or split as well. And then they have some really good dev tools, too. So one of them is the app that I talked about in the beginning. If you downloaded the NativeScript Playground for your phone, you can simply, when you're building, you can run TNS preview, and it'll give you this QR code. And anyone that's interested and happen to download it can go ahead and scan that. And this lets you get started with native without worrying about Android, without Android Studio. You don't have to download Android Studio if you don't want to. You can even develop in Mac without a Mac. So you can develop for iOS devices without having a Mac, without downloading Xcode, any of that stuff, which I don't know any other system that allows you to do this. I'm going to go ahead and take this away. And so that's what the Playground app does. And they also have a browser-based IDE very similar to StackBlitz. And walking through this is how I got set up and used to NativeScript. They do a really good job going into the details of the templating system, because it is a separate templating system than HTML. It's actually XML, and it's more similar to more native development. You'll notice in here, like, I'll give a demo on that in a second. But the thing I found most valuable from this was this build a full app tutorial here. They do a really good job going through the templating system, their style system, and really showing you the nuts and bolts of the product. So I highly recommend that if you really want to get into it. Okay, and the other strength is it's designed for incremental conversion. So you can convert one route at a time. You don't have to try to convert your whole app over all at once. You can very easily go through and, like, all right, I'm going to convert the home page. Now I'm going to convert the next page, like that. And it compiles to, it doesn't compile to native language. Actually, it runs inside of a JavaScript engine inside of the native application. But it's still very fast. It's much faster than like a web view that you'd have with Ionic or whatever. And it has really good plugins for native features. You have really good access to the gyroscope, the camera, and even the augmented reality engine from the native system. And so when is a good time to use NativeScript? For the majority of time, I think if you have a hybrid system, if you need to have separate templates for your web and your native side, and you want those native templates to look like they belong on iOS, if you want them to look like they belong on Android, NativeScript is a really good option. If you have some shared and split functionality, like I kind of already talked about, it's really good at code splitting. It's really good about having features that you want to have on one side and not on the other, and really good at sharing, obviously. And if you need access to the native API. Alternatively, if you just are really good with Angular or Vue and you would like to fiddle around with some native app building, this is a really good option because you can kind of like slowly transition into like more native feeling templates and like more native style development without kind of having to learn the whole language, like Swift or whatever you'd be working in. And again, I'm just going to show you the website again real fast. If you're interested in walking through the whole README, just go to GitHub/Nathan/tour of NativeScript, and the README is set out pretty clearly. And there's actually branches for each step. If you're interested, you can start with any branch you want, kind of, and go from there. Okay, so let's pull up our code. And here we actually have 3 instances of this code running right now. I'm building here I'm building for the emulator, and the emulator is running. I have the web app building over here, and that's compiled and running over here, our tour of heroes. And then the TNS preview that I showed you earlier is also another build running. So it's pretty powerful to be able to do this all at the same time. And so we've all seen the Tour of Heroes app. I'm just going to 2-second run through of it. You start out with a dashboard. You can click on this and get these little bit of details on these heroes, and then you have the whole heroes list. And I only built the dashboard and the hero detail like this because I kind of wanted to focus on the code splitting and the code sharing functionality. But here it is on the emulator, and you'll see that the details are very basic, just like they are here. I mean, it's just the name and the ID basically. But we wanted to add new functionality of taking a picture on the native side. So what happens, so I'm going to show you just the end basically and walk through the pieces that are different from the normal Tour of Hero app. And so when I ran the ng add NativeScript schematics, it went through and added and like I said, there's a .tns affix to the end of all the components that the NativeScript compiler was going to like search out and find. So when it's going through, there's an app component.tns and an app component.tns.tns.ts. And so it's going to ignore this one in this instance and grab this one on its build process. And anytime you see that duplication, that's the reason behind it. It's because it needs to ignore one and take the other. And so the app module, do a quick comparison. So our app module for our website has all of our components because we're using all of them. We need the HTTP client, or the in-memory web module because we're using that for this demo. And then our HTTP client. And so it's very, very bare bones as far as an app goes and its imports. And then, so most of this was generated when I ran the schematic. but I'm only importing the dashboard component and the app component and the hero detail component because those are the only components that I've converted over. And then NativeScript has its own separate HTTP client module. It also has a separate forms module because forms run a little different in the native environment than they do for the web. But we didn't need that. I just wanted to point that out. And then we're also able to quickly, so we use the in-memory data service for the web side, and so I had to import them for the native side as well. So it's very similar on both sides. And now we have our routing module. And so you see, again, we have this duplication and separation where we duplicate that module and add this TNS affix to it. And so this is how you this is kind of the guts where you can kind of help separate out your routes. And so if I wanted to completely share all of my routes, I could easily create a separate file that just exports this const routes and then import them into both modules. And then that way, whenever you make an update, you only have to change it in one place. But for our purposes, we wanted to have this separation of our routing structure. So we just, this looks very similar to the normal the normal routing module, but we're using the NativeScript router module in place of the normal router module here. And so that all feels very similar, right? If you don't have to learn a new routing system, this one of the key things that makes this like an easy transition to the native side. And then, so if we go to our components now, we have our dashboard. The dashboard was the first piece that we created. Let me shrink this a little bit. There we go. And so in our dashboard, you see our normal website here. We have the normal HTML file, the normal CSS file, and then we have the shared component file, the component class. And all the logic is being reused across. The logic is very minimal here, but it's being used by both sides. On init, we're getting our heroes, and we only have one function here, just go to the detail, and it's just navigating us to that route. So when I went to make this dashboard, all I had to do was a separate generate command that you can use, and it's ng generate convert component, and then you just give it the name of the component you want to convert. And so we gave it the name of dashboard, and it went through and created these 2 extra files and added it to the TNS, or the NativeScript module, to the imports. And then all I had to do was give it a template. And so when you run that command, it shows you the original template to kind of give you just something to look at, to like help you remember what you need to put in here. And then it also gives you, it creates this TNS file as well, or the CSS file as well. And the CSS is a subset of web CSS. You don't have all the features. You'll see that I have to use border color, border width. I couldn't use border alone, and the shortcut with border 1 pixel solid red. That doesn't work. You only get a subset of the CSS classes, and the playground app that I showed you, where you build the whole one, it gives you a little bit better rundown of what you can use and can't use. But here you can see that it would be easy to share your styles, share your colors. So like if you have a theme in mind, you could use mix-ins to pull in your theme across both sides of the app. You're not recreating your whole theming system in 2 places. You can share a lot. And then this is our layout file. So there's quite a few different layout systems for NativeScript. I think there's 6. I stuck with Flexbox layout the most. It's one that's designed to be accessible to to web developers because it's very similar to Flexbox in general. And so I just gave it a flex direction of column and gave a flex score of 1 so that they split the screen evenly. And it's hard to describe, but you really it felt more like you were writing in mobile, I guess. It was more like the grid system, it just felt more like it was designed to fit on a phone. Like, it's really hard to describe, but I mean, this isn't the best view, obviously, but it just felt like it was designed more to fit on a small screen when you're working with it. And so you can see that this is the normal dashboard, and I scaled it back for this to kind of make it, just big buttons for the small phone and stuff. And obviously it doesn't have all the features, but it works. Oh, it should work. Okay, there we go. Here we go. Okay, so again, like I said, all I had to do was go and make this system and call that function. There was no rewriting any of my components or my component class. All I had to do was reference that function and then hit there's a slightly different, instead of click, you have tap for NativeScript. I think it's to be more in line with native development. But that's all there was to creating this first dashboard, and I didn't have to create any background logic for this piece. It was already there for me. And then, so when you click on that, that takes you to the hero detail component. And again, this is there's a few more files in here. But it created a tns.html file and a tns.css file. But in here, so we'll look at these real fast, and then I'll get into the other part. So I used a stack layout here instead of the flex layout, just to try to try some of the different layouts they have. But you'll see something you'll probably notice right away is I'm not doing interpolation with this, like we're used to seeing, and using hero.name, gnome name. There's this text inside the label. And so this is closer, more resembles native app development. So you this is the part where it took me the most time to get used to, because it's very close, but sometimes when things are very close to what you're expecting but a little different, it takes you a little bit to get used to. But they have these directives that you pass your values to that get interpolated into this label system here. And then we just have a button for taking a photo, and this is part of the split functionality I was talking about. On our native side, we're going to be able to take a picture of our photo, of our hero, and add it to our app, where on the website we don't have that functionality. So if for whatever reason you want to have some gyroscope interaction or a camera interaction or whatever on your native side, you're able to do that. And then we just have this image container here. And so when we take the picture, we're going to give the path to this hero image path, and this will display it after we take the picture. And again, this gave us the original web template, which makes getting started a little easy so you're not switching back and forth between files to try to remember all the pieces you need to create. Okay. And so here's our component. And so initially we just had this save. Okay, let's look at this. So when we go here, this was designed to allow you to update your hero and go back. And so now we change the name of our hero or whatever. And so that's where the other logic comes in here, is we're able to update our hero's name and go back. We're the initial functionality of that view. But we wanted to add this handle take photo, or take a photo of the hero. But if we put all that logic in this component, it would break our website, because our web app doesn't have access to the native APIs. So we have to create these split files. And to do that, you'll see that I'm importing this take photo function here, and I'm using it in this handle take photo function down here. And I'm importing it from these .split files. And this allows us to, this is the crux of what you need to do to have a component that can do one thing on the website and another thing on the native side. And it uses the same functionality of ignoring the .tns on the website and using it on the NativeScript side. So we simply, up here, we import this function from HeroDetail.split, and the web side knows to get the .ts, the NativeScript side knows to get the .tns.ts, and so on our web side, we just have basically an error get called if it gets called, because our website is never calling that function. Nothing in the web template is ever going to call this. So if they do call it, you should throw an error and say, this should never be called in this context. You could also add hook into the web API here, or the web camera API here. If you wanted to have it, if you wanted to have the web take a picture, you could just hook into the web API, and so have it call one function on the web side and the other function in the native side. And then this is the reason we had to split it out into these separate files, because when if these imports are in this file, the website's not going to know what to do, because it doesn't have access to any of these native APIs, and it'll break your web app. So to take a picture on the native side, we import the camera from NativeScript camera. We import this known folders and path from the NativeScript file system, and image source. And the image source is just something that helps us kind of process this image and save it to a spot. So in this function, we go through. We first check if it's available, and if it is available, I think that should be in await. But if it is available, then we check for request permissions. So that'll throw up the, do you want to allow NativeScript to use your phone or your camera? And then if they say yes, we go ahead and take a picture, and that brings up your picture screen. So we can go ahead and do that. Nope, not that one. This is going great. Come on. Okay, take a picture. And so I already gave it permission when I was running the test, but it will, the first time it will say, hey, do you want to allow this app to use your phone? And then we take the picture of a squinty-eyed person as Narco, and now it's saved in the app. So after you take a picture, it takes that asset. We use a couple of these NativeScript functions to process the image, and we use this known folders to set up a path for it to be saved to. We're using the hero name as the file name, and we're saving it and sending back this hero image path to to our component file. And it gets stored here in this hero image path. Down here. And this is just a very kind of basic separation and sharing system, but you can kind of see how powerful this could get and how many options this gives you. Because as soon as you start trying to recreate an app in one environment and making it just a tiny bit different than the original environment, things can get kind of hairy really fast. But this lets you really finally separate all your logic out and do all kinds of different stuff. I wanted to end this with an intro into their, they have augmented reality plugin. It was going to be a little bit more complex than we could get into this time, but I'm working on turning this into a workshop that we'd like to start doing sometime soon, and I'll definitely add the augmented reality stuff at that point. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I have like 8, but I'll let somebody else go first. Yeah, Mike
Hey, maybe you covered this, but there's what if we have enough overlap? Like you said, you wanted to pull it out, like for a configuration file. Is there are there certain folders that that don't need the TNS descriptor, or I guess I forget what you called it.
So yeah, any component that you're not trying to convert over, you just wouldn't have any of those TNS files in it. Is that?
No, I mean like if you had some business logic that you wanted to be used on the phone and to be used on a website, but you didn't want to have 2 different files with all that stuff in it, like rewritten.
Do you mean like the templates or the logic?
The logic.
What you're
Like,
asking is with every file that you didn't do a TNS on.
is that really the okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like all those split files.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. Like, you don't get that for free. Yeah. I got a preview of this, and I'm like, that is really cool.
Yeah. So the only reason I had to have these 2 split files was because of this function here, and because it has to build this function on both sides, but it's just not used on the website. So, and that would have been totally fine if I wasn't pulling in these imports. So even if you do have separate functionality, you can do that without these split files. I only had to do that because of these imports up here, and the web didn't know what to try to do with these. It's like I don't know how to get these plugins. I don't have access to those.
I have a lot of questions. I'll try to trade off. Could you show one of the other folders other than hero detail, like literally like maybe the next one down? Yeah, that's what I wanted to see. So in the one you were showing, it was kind of burying the lead, right? That like you only had one file that was used identically on both in your hero detail, just your component file.
Yeah.
But like on all the others, tell me if I have it wrong, all 3 of these files are used on both, right?
No. So it always NativeScript always has to have a separate CSS and HTML file that has this whole separate HTML templating system.
I mean, but for the TypeScript file.
Yes.
Like if I looked at the next TypeScript file, like by default, are all the TypeScript files shared?
Yes, by default. So like this is the one where everything is, the first dashboard one, I didn't have to do anything besides make a template and a CSS file. So these are the only 2 new files, and you know, all I did to do was add this little bit and call this go-to-detail function, which is already available from you know the website. So, and I don't want to, this is awesome, but the templating and the layout is no joke to get into. It took me a while to get used to it, and I still have a lot to learn. But yeah, it's really, really nice.
I noticed in the dashboard component TS, you did a router navigate, and you imported the regular router. So how does it know to use the NativeScript router instead of the regular router?
because it always uses the NativeScript router, and so how do I say this? That's for the build process, basically. It's yeah. So there's the dashboard. Okay, so router. So Angular router. I don't know exactly how they do it, but anytime you're calling the Angular router, they replace it with their NativeScript router, and it.
So just by the fact that you imported the NativeScript router, it knows to substitute it.
Yeah, and in the root module, in the root app module, it's always going to use that version of the router.
So I've noticed that your editor is surprisingly happy with all these TNS HTML and CSS files that are not actually HTML and CSS files. Is there like a plugin that you've added to make it understand that alternative syntax, or like how are you doing that without it having a bunch of squigglies all over your page?
I did install a NativeScript plugin. That's my bug watch. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah, here. I installed this, but I didn't see any squigglies before this. This does. I think this is more for code completion, but it seemed fine with it. I don't know if it was VS Code being lazy or smart.
So you have a TNS HTML file for mobile. Is that used on Android and iOS?
Yes.
Okay. Is it consistent enough that you don't have to detect which platform you're on and do things differently in the file?
I've never had to, and it should kind of. There's a whole suite of widgets that NativeScript offers too to give you that really native feel too. So like your inputs will look like the iOS inputs and on the iOS, and Android on the Android device.
I have a question on like you showed us two different layouts. So I have not written a native Android program in several years, and the one I did was really, really microscopically simple, or else I should know this. But like, are these layouts, like, are these features of how the native stuff does layout that you're just using? Or like, is that Flexbox layout a feature of NativeScript? So like, is that like a feature of the Android, or is that a feature of NativeScript?
I'm 90% sure that it's NativeScript, and I feel like they kind of split the difference between the native templating system and the web templating system. But you've done it once. I've done it never. I've never done anything besides this as far as native goes. But from random tutorials from years ago, I believe it's this XML style with the the capital case, and this seems like what I remember.
So you mentioned how that split file, where down one path you could go and use the native camera access, and on the other path you could, if you wanted, throw in like the web path of using the camera APIs in the browser.
Mm-hmm.
What if in an alternate universe you just said, you know what, I'm just going to code this once with the native web version? You had mentioned this is like a JS wrapper when it runs natively. Like, could you actually do that? Could you just use the native hardware APIs and have the right thing magically happen?
I did not try that. I wouldn't think so, because that's a part of the web standard, and this isn't a web wrapper. This is building it with the native views. So where Ionic could probably do that easily, because it's just a web view and they're displaying an HTML page. This is not doing that. I would guess no, but I didn't try.
So, I've met a few of the Ionic people, and they seem really smart too.
Yeah.
And they say their thing is like really fast and awesome too. So like, how do you have any more on like how you would compare and contrast like when Ionic is or is not a good choice versus this? Because like if you look at both, they both say they're awesome. You know?
Yeah, I think they both are awesome. I think a good time to use one over the other is if performance is really important. I mean, and Ionic's fast because the web has gotten really fast. I mean, JavaScript's a slow language, but it's just gotten faster over the years, it seems like. This should be faster. They claim to be more performant than the web views. They both have really good access to the APIs, or like the native APIs, but I believe there's a difference here where I guess they both have workarounds for getting like that varied root access to them. But NativeScript claims to be kind of closer to bare metal, I guess, as far as the APIs go. And they say that you can have access to any and every native API. I'm not really sure how, because I didn't do anything like really crazy with it. But I would say if you have a lot of code splitting going on, I know that NativeScript does it very well. I've used Ionic in the past. I've never had an instance where I needed to do something like that, but I don't know how well Ionic does something like where one environment shows one thing, another environment can do another thing. Additionally, if you need to have separate views for your web and your native, I would go with NativeScript. I believe Ionic is more you're gonna see the same thing in every platform, unless you're like I know if you're using their widgets, they align with the environment. But if you're just like throwing HTML in there, it's gonna look the same everywhere. So the code splitting, code sharing, and performance, those are the main things to think about, is what you're trying to get. And I will say this is not like something to take to, if you have that requirement I talked about in the beginning, where we built a web app and now we need a native app in a week, NativeScript isn't going to do that for you. I mean, you're going to have to learn a lot to build this over, and you have to kind of bring it over component by component. But it's really fast, and it's really good for that separate views and separate functionality.
I think when I was just glancing through it, I saw there was a .ios extension you could put on HTML views. I was wondering if maybe if you're doing .ios.html, or I don't know where the .ios goes in the file name, if you maybe have different view template capabilities, like those would be more native compiled. Whereas like maybe the ones that are just .tns.html are kind of like the Xamarin Forms equivalent, where they're just kind of more generic and not as platform specific.
I did not see that. I've never. This is the first I'm hearing of that. So, sorry.
Yeah, so this is more, it's kind of like a question, I guess. So following up on the Ionic versus NativeScript idea, like from what I'm seeing, this is my only exposure to NativeScript here. So from what I'm seeing, it looks like NativeScript has a really great niche of, I've already got a team that has been focused on building an Angular application, and they've done a great job of like building that out from the ground up as an Angular application. And I now actually want a native equivalent to that. Whereas Ionic has always been more of you build one application, and so like as you're building it, you have to consider like all of the different platforms all at once, like from the ground up, laced throughout every component. And so it's like if you're starting down that path, knowing you want a web mobile reusable code base all in one, that sounds like Ionic's niche. But from what I'm seeing here, I actually like this kind of splitting idea of like, no, you start with all of your logic in the TypeScript, and then you just have these alternative views that are specific for your platform. And then, of course, the splitting capability of the TS files as well. Does that track with what you've seen in your experience with it so far?
Yeah, The only thing I'm kind of unsure, like everything seems accurate with what you said. The only thing I'm unsure of is the conversion. I've never tried to convert a normal app to Ionic, so it might be able to do it better than I know. But yeah, as far as I've experienced, that's accurate.
And let's say, do you have one more question?
I think we're wrapped up, unless you have one.
No, I don't know. I assumed you had one, and I was going to say it's the final question.
I'm out.
So, all right. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And there's probably still some more pizza and food. So, and come to Paul's event in the evening. Next week, is it? Or next month. All right. And then we'll be here again next month as well. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.